Hello and welcome to another episode of Vintage Pens for the Modern User. In this special episode, we're going to explore how one might go about acquiring a vintage pen. Now, there are many avenues that you can take to do this, but I believe the best approach is to find a pen show that is within reasonable distance, or if you have the means, fly to a pen show. That way you can see an abundance of fountain pens that have been restored. You can meet with the people who are selling them. You can get a good feel for who you're dealing with, and you can learn exactly about the pen that you are considering purchasing. So for this special edition, we are off to the California Pen Show, which was held this year in Los Angeles at the Torrance Marriott Hotel. It was a wonderful pen show that I attended. I'm going to take you through it as an overview and give you some examples of why I think this is the best way to go about purchasing your first vintage fountain pen. So join me as we travel today. Here we are walking into the California Pen Show at the Marriott Hotel in Torrance. As you can see, it does get a little bit crowded. This is not the main ballroom, simply the hallway where you see dealers are already set up. It might be easy to get distracted and look, and certainly I would encourage you to do so. But for the sake of this video, we are skipping ahead to find the vintage pens. So we've rounded the corner to the secondary hallway, which will allow us to enter into the ballroom. Let's see what we can find. I recognize this dealer here who is from the UK, and he certainly has a nice array of pens. We see in front of us already some nice vintage pens mixed in with modern. But here we have a folio of Parker Vacuumatics, a pen we've talked about on this channel before. Look at the selection that this dealer has. Quite a variety to choose from. We're over here, some modern pens that he has, some very artful finish pens, and then again here are some more vintage pens. There are some Conklins in the folder there. There are some Schaefers in the folder as well. So there are a lot of good options to choose from as you scan, and it's important to look closely because as you're at a pen show, you can easily become overwhelmed. So having a target pen in mind is certainly helpful. There are some English dual folds, which are nice vintage pens there. This is the main ballroom at the California Pen Show. I'm just doing a nice 360 so you can see really how many opportunities could present themselves in this ballroom, how many dealers are here, and certainly how many thousands of vintage pens are possible to find. What a joy. Make sure you pay attention to signs like these, as it is common courtesy to ask before touching pens, especially if you don't know what the pen is you may be picking up. It could be the most expensive one on the table. Here is an example of why it's so advantageous to get out in person and shop for vintage pens at a pen show. You can see here this person is testing a vintage fountain pen, what appears to be a Schaefer's, which is not commonly found with flex, but the early ones certainly had it. They're getting good instruction from the dealer who's selling the pen, who can advise them really on how much flex this nib is capable of, so that they know what they can put the nib through in terms of its paces for writing without damaging it, and they can also find something that writes exactly the way they want. They may want more flex or less flex, but buying in this manner allows them to walk away assured they got the pen they wanted. Here is another dealer who is taking the time to show some of his pens to his customers. Dealers are always happy to talk to their customers and learn what they are looking for specifically. Even if you don't know a model, maybe you want a pen that's a ring top, maybe you want a pen with a clip, maybe you want a large pen or a small pen, maybe you want a flexible nib, maybe you want a stub nib. Maybe you want a celluloid pen. Maybe you want a hard rubber pen. These are all things that the dealer is happy to work with you on, even if you can't name a specific brand or a specific model. And then, of course, this dealer is letting the person write with the pens. They have bottles of ink there, a nice pad of paper, which is more than inviting for people to go ahead and make sure the vintage pen is the one they want. Here we have some up-close look at some pen folios that dealers often use to transport their vintage pens. This dealer has some gorgeous metal overlay pens, sterling swan fountain pens, as well as gold overlay. They could be gold filled or solid gold. We have the hard rubber pens in the front here, as well as some other overlays, the celluloid Parker Vacuumatics, the Parker 51s. There's a lot of pens here, so it's good if you can have a specific model in mind when you're going to a pen show that you can ID at sight. Here we have a nice tray of vintage Pelican fountain pens. Those are the Pelican 140s that you may recall from a video I did on that series. The vintage Pelicans are great piston filling fountain pens and make wonderful entries, especially the Pelican 140, into the world of German piston fillers as vintage pens. Remember, these pens have interchangeable nib units, which make all the variety of nibs that you can have in them available to you. Here are some vintage Schaefer snorkels, as well as some other Schaefers. You see there's quite an array of vintage pens here. And here again, we have some more of the vintage Parker 51s there on the end, a Parker Duofold, and here we have several more Pelicans. Some Pelican 400 NN on the top, some regular Pelican 100. So there's a nice array, and there is a mix of vintage and modern. Another thing you might encounter at a pen show are bins of fountain pens and pencils, sometimes marked as a bulk price. $10 per pen, $15 per pen, $30, $40, $50, and you can dig through. Now these will all be unrestored, so it's important to know what you're doing when you shop through a bin. On the other hand, if you fancy doing pen repair, shopping through one of those bins and finding a pen in need of restoration is good, and often at a pen show you may find a booth like this, well equipped with so many tools, perhaps more tools than you would even know what to do with. But it's good to have the option to shop for vintage tools for pen repair in person as well. Often you can pick up the very basic tools, such as basic section pliers, shellac, some nice dental picks, some nice tweezers. You may even be able to buy sacks. You may be able to buy a variety of plunging type devices, flushing devices. Here we see some loops available for you to buy. We also see talc powder, which can be useful in restoration. There's some more tweezers, as I mentioned before, and we have some polishing cloths as well as compounds, some various brushes for cleaning, and the really best book for pen repair by Jim Marshall and Lawrence Oldfield, which is well worth having if you dive into that side of the hobby. This dealer has some exceptional fountain pens. Here we see some vintage Conklin fountain pens, followed by some vintage Watermans, including some with some sterling silver overlay. They're quite lovely. Some Maquier fountain pens. We have some Eisenstadt fountain pens, some Pelican fountain pens. We have some Omos and some more Pelican. Now you may have bought a vintage pen that was unrestored. Perhaps you bought it at the pen show knowing it was unrestored, or maybe you came to the pen show with a vintage fountain pen you found at an antique mall, or at a garage sale, or at a flea market. Well, many pen shows try to have at least one, if not many people on site who repair pens at the show. It is a wonderful way to get your vintage pen restored while you wait. Often you can drop it off towards the beginning of the show, shop around the show, and pick it up at the end of the day. It's important to know that these repair persons are quite busy. They don't necessarily mind you watching, but be mindful. This person handed 4 pens to this repair person, and he quickly set them aside. Some repair people may be willing to take on that many at once, but often they're going to try to serve as many customers as they can at one time, rather than do many pens for a single customer. So bear that in mind.
Not every repair person is the same with this policy, but be prepared to have potentially just one fountain pen restored. It's also a wonderful place to simply hang out and talk, learn about pens, learn about their filling mechanisms, see what makes these vintage pens so unique, and in fact so durable because they can be written with every day. They were designed to be serviced regularly and last a long time. Here is another tray of vintage fountain pens. Some of the ballrooms that these pen shows happen in are not necessarily well lit. And this dealer has actually gone through the extra effort to set up nice lighting so that you can easily see all the pens, and this is a good thing. Be mindful to take your time and really look closely at all the wonderful vintage fountain pens that a dealer has put forth the effort to clean, restore, and bring to the table. They're often more than happy to talk to you about any of the pens that you ask them about on their table. They share an enthusiasm for this hobby, and they want to share it with you. To learn more about vintage fountain pens, check out the Pen Collectors of America. They provide tremendous resources for everyone.
Well, no pen show is complete without the post-pen show finds video. And of course, this is tacked on to the same video today, but I'm going to show you one of the pens that I acquired while I was in California. It is an Osmia Faber-Castell fountain pen made in Germany. I'm not going to get into detail too much with it, but this is the logo, very identifiable with this sort of square turned diamond pattern in a circle here. The Osmia logo on the clip, and the pen is marked Osmia A. Faber-Castell. It's also marked at the bottom the model number. This one is model 63, and then the nib size is marked, which is BB. So you can probably see why I'm excited about this nib. BB, of course, would be an extra broad nib. This pen was actually a gift from a mentor of mine and a friend in California who gave it to me. But knowing me and knowing what I like, he was spot on. Now look here at this lovely ink view window that has this spiral pattern, which looks like almost a double helix when you look through it. Removing the cap exposes a nib. This is a steel nib. It's got a nice double broad tip. This is a piston filling pen that's been restored with a new cork. And in order to fill it, this piston filler is not integrated into the blind cap. Instead, you remove the blind cap and the piston knob is exposed. As always, we have our trusty Waterman's blue ink. I'll extend the piston all the way down, and then I'll get it submerged nicely into my ink and withdraw the piston back up now with ink in the barrel. I may need to tip my inkwell as I am getting a little bit low here. We'll give it another go, down and up again. These piston fillers do hold a nice volume of ink, and they are really nice writers. This being a double broad nib, I will put the cap on that ink, of course, is going to really give us a nice italic. And as a lefty, I actually can use the italic writing pretty well. This one is broad and flexible. And it's an italic, also known as a double broad nib. By the company Osmia A. Faber-Castell. I don't remember if it's one L or two L's, but I put two there just because. So there you have it. That is my pen show find. And this is why I think it's always good to go shop in person. You never know who you're going to meet. You may wind up building some long-term connections and long-term friendships, or you may build a specific connection with a specific dealer that you trust. And that way you can confidently buy your vintage pens from someone knowing
that they will be working, knowing that you have someone who will work with you if you run into issues, and they can help you along the way. Personal connections are great, and as always, everyone, happy writing and enjoy and use your vintage pens.